It stands to this day. During the economic downfall following the fire, the people of Lyeford naturally sought some kind of rationalization for the chaotic, terrible thing that happened. So it was that a building in the center of the town was repaired and became a church. Religion had never been prominent in Lyeford before, but following the disaster, little else could comfort the small Christian community. It is interesting to note that, according to local lore, it is by sheer coincidence the same day the church was erected that a young, smiling priest, Henry Wilde, wandered down the road and on into the town. Henry Wilde identified himself to the congregation as a new priest from New Jersey, who had heard all about the church and wanted to be a part of it. Some wondered how he had heard about the church project at all, but most were delighted to have a real priest leading them. At first, the town stuck to its traditional Christian ways, but some of Henry's more unorthodox teachings became much talk about. Henry, for example, insisted at times that as the spiritual leader of the town, he had the right to make money from the community at will and place them into personal projects, which he assured them would benefit Lyeford as a whole. Aside from this, he was known as a kind, softly spoken man. He slowly but surely made the town stick closer together and converted most, if not all, the residents to a new religion, revealed to him, he claimed, by a glowing orb in the burnt clearing in the Trinity Woods. The cult became increasingly dependent on him, and he certainly abused his power over the townfolk. For no reason, he would sometimes make whole families fast for days on end, usually with the feeble excuse of sin. Sometimes family members would die of starvation, their loyalty was so fierce. In one of Henry's most unusual acts, he declared that virginal daughters of the town belonged by right to him, and would occasionally take a young girl to the church with him at night, after which she would never be the same. By 1850, Wilde was rarely seen, living alone at the church, which was not allowed to be entered ever. The town was absolutely under his control. Crops were grown in the name of Henry. Prayers were said in the name of Henry. The dead were given gifts for Henry, placed upon altar outside the church. They would be gone by morn. However, the full horrible extent of Wilde's influence was not known until 1861, when young Susan Moth received a letter from her friend informing her of a most unpleasant incident in Lyeford. She was called to Lyeford to investigate a fellow hiker's claim that after staying up at night at the Lyeford Motel with a friend, the two were assaulted by people unknown, dragged out of their beds, and taken to the Trinity Woods clearing, where his friend was shot dead. He managed to escape and alert authority. Moth was intrigued by the case, and chose to stay in the motel herself. She continued reaching dead end after dead end. The townsfolk would not speak up. The motel claimed to have no record of a second guest, no matter how much she pursued the matter. She was not allowed entrance into the abandoned church. On her 7th night in the motel, Moth was gagged and tied up, then dragged to the town center by people wearing what appeared to be dog faces. She was, however, a physically strong woman and able to free her legs and run from her assailants, who followed close behind, screaming incoherently at her. She ran for Lyeford Hall and slammed the door, where the dog-faced men howled at her from outside, but did not enter themselves. She ripped open her arm restraints with a broken window pane and armed herself with a knife from the kitchen. She entered the upstairs bedroom, although 2 conflicting accounts were given by Miss Moth on what occurred in the room. In her memoirs and in early interviews that she gave on the subject, Moth claimed to have leapt from the window onto the veranda roof and a short way below, spending no prolonged period in the room. However, in a later interview, in her old age, Moth gave quite a different account. She claimed this time to have stayed in the room almost half an hour, during which the dog-faced men refused to enter the hall. Moth, however, heard noises from within the room. Downstairs she registered a noise as what she believed to be footsteps, and was surprised when the door was flung open by what she described as a hideously pale, gruesome old woman, whose eyes and mouth were nothing but black, screaming holes. In fright, rather than by choice, Moth scrambled backwards and found herself crashing through the window. The reason behind Moth's change of story is not known. The second version is often considered unlikely and a symptom of Moth's old age corrupting her memory of the event. Some, however, consider the second version of the events to be, in fact, more realistic, citing the time frame of the following events, which would not fit correctly unless Moth had indeed remained within the room for at least half an hour. The men in dog masks were upon her immediately, but in self-defense Moth slashed the throat of one and swiped wildly at the others in an effort to scare them off. They simply did not move, however, and stared at her. They then picked up the dying man, who was still gurgling, and he was taken away and left. It was at this point that the young agent discovered that the church's doors had been opened, very slightly, presumably by the same men who attacked her. Moth entered the church and very nearly fainted in shock upon entering. Moth wrote that Henry Wilde's home in the church was a place smelling of death. Limbs in all stages of decay, and flesh long rotted made a grotesque cocoon around the walls, behind which were innumerable bones, some animals, mostly human. I caught sight of too many skulls to name. How many of these belonged to travelers, men and women who had simply stumbled upon this terrible place and paid with their lives. I caught glimpse at least once of an infant skeleton, unmistakable and sickening. The people of the town, so warped in their obsession with the Almighty, all hating Henry, and sacrificed even children to him. He had eaten children. It took some time for Moth to see Henry himself. When she did, she was at first unsure if she was witnessing was even human. Henry had finally grown into the beast he always was inside. His sins had heaved up upon his flesh and turned him into something that I dare say was far beyond human proportion. I stood at first shocked, unable to convince myself that the beast in the church could ever have been human. The limbs were impossibly long and outstretched like a pale, hairless spider. The body was hunched over and skeletally thin. The face, oh God, the face! The eyes, inky black and always open. The nose long gone, tearing a hole into the lip which more and more of his unending fangs tore out of the black gum. The lower jaw hung on its socket, and out of it a tongue poured out, twitching and wet. It was more horrible to realize, and yes, this thing was indeed human, at least once, than it would have been to simply know of it as some demon from hell. He let out a monstrous groan and heaved towards me, his hideous smell of decay filling my lungs as he came upon me, with an intent so evil I was at first paralyzed. With surprising strength he pinned me down, one hand pushing down into my chest and the other leaving a wet print upon my face. It was no doubt of my impending death, but I vowed myself that if I were to die, I should take with me to hell this monstrosity. Fumbling in my pocket for my pen, I stuck the thing in its eye, causing him to scream in pain and to recoil, clawing at his face. I tore myself off the ground and sprinted into the wall, fitting myself between three fresh bodies and standing there limp as though I were one of them. Henry seemed to follow my scent, his nostril holes widening and contracting as he sucked in long, wheezing breaths, the pen still lodged deep within his dripping eye. I knew he would find me. In a bizarre moment of clarity, nothing short of a miracle, I felt my fingertips on the oil that coated the walls, trickling down from every corpse and every dead face. The organic oil seeping off the walls, rolling down them like sweat on some foul skin. Making a conscious effort to make as little movement as possible, I retrieved from my jacket pocket a single match I had taken from the pack they gave me at the hotel. Just before Henry could come across my hiding place, I struck the match against the wall behind me and simultaneously ignited the whole thing. The fire burst to life and spread faster than I could have anticipated, and the back of my jacket caught fire. I sprung out, and Henry, hissing, madly attacked. Wasting no time, I whipped off my jacket and flung it at him. He himself was shiny with the liquid upon his flesh, and the fire enveloped him fast. Henry screeched as the flames pressed up on his limbs, until his writhing body was all but consumed in smoke and flame. With as much difficulty and immense luck, I managed to escape the fire myself. The entire church was burned to ashes. The cult was brought down, and 17 people were found guilty of murder. Although Moth insisted that the whole town was part of the cult, she never spoke out, as her efforts put her in a much higher respect, and her memoirs, which primarily discussed the Lyeford incident, allowed her to retire wealthy, if not at peace.